It turns out that Trump's idea of challenging the certification of the electoral votes after the 2020 election might have been all Van Jones' idea, the CNN commentator who laid out the entire strategy in a TED Talk before the election in 2020 and said that the whole thing was perfectly legal and perfectly constitutional. I'll play you his presentation in just a moment, but it's Groundhog Day and the January 6th hearings continue, and yesterday they focused on Trump's legal strategy to have Mike Pence reject the electoral vote tallies and then send the decision back to the state legislatures.
There was no basis in the Constitution or laws of the United States at all for the theory espoused by Mr. Eastman, at all.
Of course, they're painting the picture that the whole idea was completely ridiculous and criminal.
The legal theory that was touted by law professor John Eastman, seen here whipping up the crowd at the former president's January 6th rally on that day. He argued that Vice President Pence that day could have rejected electoral votes from states the Trump team was challenging. Now, it would have been interesting to hear him defend his theory before the committee.
Well, ask and ye shall receive. Here's your colleague Van Jones laying it all out, because to his credit, he was concerned that Trump was going to actually use the strategy, which he calls perfectly legal and constitutional.
Okay, as an attorney, as a political commentator, and frankly, as a former White House official, I used to think I knew a lot about how America picks a president. I was wrong. I did not know. And this year, I've been doing some research into some of the fine print and all the different things in our Constitution that we never talk about. And I've discovered some legal loopholes that shocked me, I guarantee will shock you, and could determine the way that the presidential election in 2020 turns out. Instead of conceding, a losing candidate could launch a ferocious fight to grab power anyway, or to hold on to power anyway. In the courts, yes, but also in the state houses, electoral college, even in Congress. They could file, for instance, dozens of lawsuits attempting to block the counting of millions of mail-in ballots. Then they could demand that the states refuse to certify the election because of all this alleged fraud or interference from a foreign power. Any of this stuff could create such a mess in the electoral college and the Congress that the whole matter just winds up in front of the House of Representatives for the first time since the 1800s. The final tally in the House is taken not by delegate, but by delegation. In other words, individual Congress people don't get to vote. It's done by states. Now, get your head wrapped around this. In 2020, the majority of Americans live in blue states, but there are more red states. So there's a possibility that the Republicans in the House of Representatives could just anoint their candidate to be president, even without the popular vote or a majority electoral college. That could happen. Now, some people would call that outcome a perfectly legal, perfectly constitutional coup against the very idea of majority rule in the United States. A perfectly legal, perfectly constitutional, that is possible under our Constitution, and it could happen this year.
Stay tuned because there's plenty more to come in this video, but real quick, subscribe to my channel if you're new here because you obviously won't find content like this anywhere else. Usually I try to do a mix of entertaining and educational material, so subscribe to the channel and check back here on a regular basis. Now, if Mike Pence would have refused to certify the electoral votes like President Trump wanted him to, since the vice president also functions as the president of the Senate and sending, or at least trying to send, the decision back to the state legislatures, then the Democrats, of course, would have sued, and the Supreme Court would have ultimately decided whether or not that was constitutional. Many of us remember that the Supreme Court has been critically involved in decisions regarding election outcomes in the not-so-distant past, like the year 2000, when we didn't even know who the winner was for weeks after election night. And if this was such a crazy and cockamamie strategy, then why is it that Van Jones was so concerned before the election that Trump might actually try it if he were to lose? So that was Trump's lawyer John Eastman's strategy. And if it was a conspiracy, if it was a crime, then why is it that they're quietly working to amend the Electoral Count Act in order to close this supposed loophole, which would then prevent any vice president from doing just that in the future.
You know, I think one of the most important things that's happening now quietly behind the scenes on Capitol Hill in the legislative branch and legislative process is the Electoral Count Act is being revisited and going to be amended. So this will never be a question again, and we'll never have to face anything like this. I mean, and it's not as sexy as these hearings, but it is very, very important that we fix that.
So let me get this straight. They're going to amend the Electoral Count Act to close this supposed loophole that they say doesn't exist. The fact that Van Jones was warning about it and called it perfectly legal and constitutional shows again that the media and the Democrats are playing dumb and lying by omission because they know that the legal argument that Trump's team was making was widely known. And again, why are they working quietly to amend the Electoral Count Act in order to prevent any future vice president from sending the decision back to the state legislatures if Mike Pence didn't have that authority to begin with? I'm no lawyer, but I sure do know that the Democrats and the liberal media industrial complex lie 24/7. And it sure would be a shame if that old Van Jones TED Talk were to resurface and go viral. I'm tired of hearing about the 2020 election and January 6th, and I'm focused on taking back the majority in the House and the Senate come the midterms in November and preventing the Marxists from pounding the final nail into the coffin of our culture and our country. And according to old Joe, that's ultra MAGA.
No one knows better than the people in this room. We have a lot more work to do. A lot more work to do. I don't have to tell you about the ultra MAGA agenda attacking families and our freedoms. 300 discriminatory bills introduced in states across this country. In Florida, going after Mickey Mouse, for God's sake.
Well, if ultra MAGA means you're against indoctrinating children with gender-bending propaganda and you don't think people should be bringing them to drag shows, then I'm definitely ultra MAGA.
It's bizarre because when it comes to calling out Republicans, you've got these kind of, I don't know, cutesy names being used by Democrats. You know, apparently Democratic polling groups and focus groups spent months coming up with ultra MAGA, which Joe Biden started using, but immediately the Republican Party just borrowed and started selling merch.
Yes, I am selling merch, and I think it's the best political slogan since Make America Great Again. In fact, it might even be better. So order your ultra MAGA shirt from my online store at markdice.com or click the link in the description below. And like all of my designs, it's available in a t-shirt, long sleeve, and a hoodie, and a whole bunch of different colors as well. So head on over to markdice.com or click the link in the description below and check it out.
I will tell you, is the president's phrase, and the president made those comments himself just last week, as you know.
The ultra MAGA plan. Let's go, Brandon. I agree.